All right. Okay. So hello and welcome everyone to our 2024 Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival NEMO Talk series. My name is Suzanne Sanger. I'm the Executive Director of the Sunshine Coast Conservation Association. The SCCA is partnering with Rhizome Up Media, Rogue Fest, and the Sunshine Coast Arts Council to put on this year's Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival program. Our festival is sponsored by the District of Sechelt, Sunshine Coast Regional District, the Sunshine Coast Credit Union, BC Government, and Canadian Ocean Literacy Coalition, as well as many other local donors. The SCCA is a charitable nonprofit society working to protect and restore biodiversity on the Sunshine Coast in the territories of the Squamish, Shishak, Tliamin, Klahoose, and Homolko First Nations. We are deeply grateful to the First Nations of this region for stewarding the lands and waters here since time immemorial. We take great inspiration from the respect, reverence, and connection that Indigenous peoples have always had with these lands and with nature. It's in this spirit of connection between all life on our amazing planet that we bring you the Sunshine Coast Ocean Festival. The festival is inspired by the United Nations World Oceans Day. Every year on June 8th, people all around the world come together to celebrate our oceans. In 1992, the United Nations designated June 8th as World Oceans Day to raise awareness in the global public about the impacts of human actions on our oceans and to develop and mobilize a worldwide movement of citizens for the ocean. Our Ocean Festival program includes in-person and online screenings of thought-provoking and inspiring feature and short films and resources, interactive citizen science, education and advocacy activities, and of course, our NEMO Talk series, all of which are intended to inspire, enlist, and connect people in our community and well beyond to take action to protect and restore our oceans. Today, for our second talk in the NEMO series, we are very excited to host Tyranna Souque, who is a data manager and early detection lead with Coastal Restoration Society. We're going to hear from Tyranna about the work the Society is doing for control and management of invasive European green crab along the south coast of BC. Coastal Restoration Society is an environmental nonprofit based out of Vancouver Island. In her position at CRS, Tyranna works alongside Indigenous governments and the Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada on 2 projects on the coast of Vancouver Island and the mainland. These projects aim to control and mitigate the spread of invasive European green crab within BC and collect integral data that will guide future management efforts. Tyranna's presentation will focus on the impacts of European green crab along the Pacific coast and the methods of monitoring and control of this invasive species through 2 projects led by the Coastal Restoration Society and its partners. Tyranna, welcome, and thank you so much for presenting to us for this NEMO talk. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I'll just get myself set up here. Can everyone see my screen? Awesome. So I do have dogs, so I'm going to apologize in advance if there's any barking interruptions. Yeah. So let me just get organized here. So yeah, basically I have been working with the Green Crab Project for a couple of years now. So I am happy to be invited to speak on this very important topic. I'm calling in from the Chianu First Nations territory, which is in Metchosin, kind of on the southern end of Vancouver Island. Coastal Restoration Society is mostly based out of Port Alberni, but we do have a lot of projects kind of all over the island. Anything basically marine related. So we do environmental restoration and monitoring. And then we also have a little bit of work on the East Coast. So we're kind of all over the place. And so something that I think is really special about CRS is that we have a First Nations First policy. So basically all of our employment and training opportunities are presented to the local nations first. And we do a lot of consultations on making sure that their knowledge and priorities are being recognized and that we incorporate those into our projects. So as I mentioned, we have a lot of different marine projects that we work on. My main focus is in the invasive species area, but we do have other projects such as abandoned fishing and aquaculture gear and derelict vessel removal. We also do shoreline cleanups and flood cleanups and some different environmental monitoring programs. So for this talk, I'll just be focusing on two of our projects. The first one is called the South Coast European Green Crab Control Project, which is a pilot project that we have been funded for the last few years to determine how effective large-scale industrial trapping is to get rid of green crab. For the second project, it's our Pacific Region European Green Crab Mitigation and Capacity Development Project, which is basically focused on providing early detection trapping. We also provide funding and training to different First Nations groups as well as charitable community groups. Mostly focused in the Salish Sea, though we have a couple groups elsewhere. We do have one group on the Sunshine Coast and the Lower Mainland, and then, yeah, a bunch on the island. So yeah, the focus of this project is basically looking where green crab have not yet become established, and we're hoping to monitor and make sure that if they do spread, we can catch that really early. So just a little bit about European green crab. European green crab can reproduce up to 180,000 eggs that are released into the water column as larvae, and they can drift for 4 to 6 weeks, and then they settle on the ocean floor. So they can travel pretty far distances and spread pretty easily. So what makes green crabs such a big threat? For starters, they are capable of destroying large eelgrass beds in relatively short periods of time. They accomplish this by eating eelgrass or burrowing to search for food and hide from predators, which tears and uproots the eelgrass. This is an example of a large eelgrass bed on the East Coast that had a really large, healthy eelgrass bed before the arrival of green crab. And within 12 years, it was completely destroyed. So the loss of this habitat is super detrimental to species, birds, shellfish, salmon, other juvenile fish that use the eelgrass beds for cover and food. It can also increase shoreline erosion. So definitely a concern. Another threat that European green crab pose is in their ability to outcompete our native species. They are really aggressive and they eat a wide range of crabs, fish, shellfish, and snails, to name a few. In our industrial trapping program, where we have large green crab infestations, when we pull up our traps, the green crab are always the feistiest. They're out to fight you the whole time, whereas a lot of the native crabs are kind of hiding in the corner. So they definitely can outcompete, and they'll eat pretty much anything that is in the trap, whether that's mussels, fish, or even each other. In a feeding study, there was a comparison between red rock and European green crab that found that crabs of the same size, the European green crab were always consuming more than the red rock do. So even if there are some native crabs in the area, they often have a hard time competing. And in our really highly infested sites, we have a super low percentage of native bycatch. One of them was about 1% native species, and the rest was green crab. So they definitely change the dynamic in the area and can seriously wipe out a lot of other species. Even in our medium infested sites, it's closer to 50% green crab and 50% native species, which is really low when you're considering that it's one invasive species compared to all of the native species in that area. So the crabs, the fish, the jellyfish, starfish, everything like that. So yeah, they definitely take over. So for our first project, the industrial trapping project, we are mostly focused on the large scale removal. All of our trapping is done from boat. We operate Monday to Friday year round and try and remove as many green crab as possible. This data is then used to determine estimates of the population size as well as seasonal fluctuations in movement and activity. This also gives us a good idea of when the molting season and egg bearing seasons occur. While we're collecting this data, we also monitor some environmental conditions to supplement. So just trying to figure out what areas the green crab prefer and what kind of impact they have on the ecosystem and how long it takes for an ecosystem to bounce back after they've been removed. So we do some monitoring of other native species and then eelgrass and others. And then this project also provides some employment opportunities to local nations. For our first location, we were trapping in Souque Basin, which has that medium-sized green crab population. It's considered to be genetically isolated from the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is where the majority of the spread is. And that's because this area is considered a closed system. So the Souque Harbor has this really narrow, high current entrance into the basin that doesn't get a lot of larval flow. So basically, the likelihood of the larvae is very low of getting into the basin. It was believed that there was one initial introduction of crabs, and then that began the population. So they stay relatively contained. This trapping area is a priority for the Souque Nation, which is one of our partners, and DFO, as well as our neighbors in Washington, who we work with and communicate frequently. The second location we have this trapping program going is up in Clayoquot Sound. There is a range of infestation levels here from very low to extremely high, depending on which site we're trapping at. So this location, as I mentioned, is considered an open system, meaning that the larvae can be introduced repeatedly and spread freely with the current, which makes management a lot more difficult. The trapping here is a priority for the Hausut and Tloquit nations as well as DFO. And so at the end of this project, which is coming to a close at the end of this year, potentially, we are hoping to be able to provide insight to our partners for the best methods for future management efforts. We've tested various trap types and bait to determine what best catches European green crab. And this project also helped us paint a better picture of how much time and money is required to reduce a green crab population to a manageable size. While complete elimination would be ideal, it is not very likely given the high number of eggs a female can produce, and they can also reproduce once or twice a year. And the larvae are able to spread pretty far distances with the current. The two locations chosen will help us compare the different levels of effort that are required depending on whether it is an open system or a closed system that our partners are looking to trap. And this program has also allowed us to collect, as I mentioned, the eelgrass data and then different native bycatch information as well over a few years. So this can help us, just determine how that ecosystem bounces back after we remove green crab. So the second project that I was mentioning is the Early Detection Project, which is mainly focused on building relationships with First Nations and community groups across the Salish Sea. So we provide the gear, the training, the funding, and try to get these groups involved in monthly monitoring. This trapping is generally conducted by foot. We do a little bit of boat trapping review as well, but it's largely focused on low tide, going pretty far up the intertidal and really shallow water. DFO created this project to expand on their current network and work to get more eyes on the shoreline. So just hoping to catch that spread as early as possible. If you do catch the spread really early, you have a way better chance of local eradication, especially if that group is able to go out and just put a ton of traps in the water as soon as possible. An example of this is on Salt Spring Island. They had a detection and did a bunch of trapping and haven't caught them since. So hopefully that stays that way. And then data is collected for this project as well, basically creating that baseline of the native species pre-invasion. That way, if the green crab do show up, you have a good picture of what impacts they can have as well. So for the industrial trapping, we have similar methods to the foot trapping. It's a little bit different. Usually you have 3 technicians that are trapping from a boat. We're deploying 60 to 80 commercial prawn traps a day and 20 minnow traps a day. So it's full-time trapping, full hours. And the traps are left there for 24 hours. And then we come back the next day, pull them up and count and sex and collect all of our data. And then we rotate between a few different sites each week. For the early detection, we use slightly different traps. We have our minnow traps, the same as the other program, but then we use these smaller, lightweight folding prawn traps. These are just a lot easier because you're usually hiking into a site, so you have to carry all your gear on your back. These, again, are set for 24 hours and then pulled up and collected for all the data the next day. Typically, groups have 2 sites that they're monitoring once a month and during the summer months, and this will give us a good chance of catching them early if they do show up. For the data collection, we record temperature and salinity of our sites, as well as the depth of the traps. We do total counts of the green crab and our native species. We also look at the sexes of the crabs and the size of the crabs, as well as GPS coordinates. And we do some drone imagery of our sites to look at eelgrass. So this is just a quick overview of our data collection methods. So for measurements, we do the widest part of the crab, which is called point-to-point measurements. This gives us a good idea of what age class the green crab are. They can grow up to 40 millimeters in the first year and up to 100 millimeters maximum after 5 or 6 years of life. So this will, just tell us how long the green crab have potentially been in a location. And then we record the sex of them as well. So the males are in the far lower right corner with the triangular shape, and then the females are a little bit more rounded with this beehive shape that's a slightly different color. And then in the middle is a photo of some varied females, which means they are carrying eggs. The orange eggs are a little bit earlier in their development, and the brown eggs are close to becoming the larvae. So after we've collected our data, we're looking at catch per unit effort, which is basically the number of crabs that are caught per trap per hour, which is kind of the best indication of a relative population size for the area. And then we also look at the different sex ratios and bycatch and look for seasonal patterns, as well as any changes in eelgrass in our areas. So I have some data to present for the industrial trapping program. There is nothing that I can show in this presentation for the early detection. We just started it this past year, and there was a pretty low sample size, so we weren't able to do analysis on any of it. But we had 20 groups that were out collecting data. So hopefully this year we'll have a nice picture from that. So for the industrial trapping program, we have 2 locations, Clayoquot Sound and Souque Basin, that have collected almost 700,000 green crab since November of 2021. So just over 2 years, 3 years, 2 years. Sorry. So yeah, Clayoquot Sound definitely has the larger population in general than Souque Basin, but all in all, there's a lot of crabs out there, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort to lower their numbers or get rid of them. So as I mentioned, there's definitely different population sizes on where you're trapping. Besides these 4 sites, we do a lot of test trapping as well, just determining where they are and how high the population is nearby. Cyper is definitely our largest site. This is the one that I mentioned that only had about 1% bycatch. So definitely largely green crab there. And then some of the other locations are a bit lower in the catches, but still relatively high. For Souque Basin, it is a lot more even, which is likely because it is all kind of interconnected. So a lot of this movement inside the basin is possible with the green crab. They don't have those large inlets that are kind of secluded by deep sections of water. So this is just a little bit of our early analysis for our data up to April of this year. Basically, we see some definitely trends for the season. European green crab tend to spike kind of in the summer and the late fall, whereas in the winter and the early spring, they really drop off. So during this time, they're going through molting, they're doing a bit of mating, and then most of the females that we catch are egg bearing. The females are generally a little bit more risk averse during this time, so they stay out of the traps a bit more. And it's also a bit colder, which means that they're likely less active. So in Clayoquot Sound, since we've started our trapping program, we've definitely seen a significant decrease in the population sizes. It was a little bit steeper of a drop off in the beginning, and now it's leveled out a little bit, which is why we have started increasing the pressure by putting more traps in the water and trapping more frequently to try and speed that up a little bit. For Souque Basin, we also saw a decreasing trend in the population, but not as extreme. Again, our population was a little bit smaller to begin with, so it's kind of in that middle range that seems to be a little bit harder to get rid of. This is just a quick look at the sex ratios. So we definitely have some patterns based on the season. As I was mentioning, the females hide out in the winter. Something that's interesting is that Souque tends to have quite a bit more males, whereas Clayoquot has way more females. And this is just a couple of graphs on the buried females. So they tend to peak from January to May. So that is a really high priority for us. If we're going to be trapping, we definitely want to be out during those months, even if the weather is awful. We just want to try and target them and get rid of as many of them as possible. Because as I mentioned, the females can have 180,000 eggs. So really, really rapid reproduction, and populations can grow quickly. So we try to target them as much as possible. So as I was mentioning, bycatch is really low at a lot of these sites. However, some differences between them. Lemons has our lowest green crab population. It also has the largest eelgrass bed, and it has the least green crab. So it definitely seems like there's a pretty good correlation between a healthy ecosystem when there's less green crab, whereas Tranquil, Bedwell are kind of in that medium range, and they do have mostly fish, but we don't catch a lot of crabs in general. And then Cyper is the same with that pretty low eelgrass, pretty low bycatch. So Souque, as I mentioned, has a bit smaller population than Clayoquot does, and we definitely have more bycatch in general. Largely composed of graceful crabs. We have a ton of those in the basin. And then Cecinos has our largest variety in species. There's a bit more crabs and others, and it also has the largest eelgrass bed. This is just a quick shot of some of the drone mapping that we're doing with the eelgrass. So we're monitoring the same locations every year and trying to look at the comparisons between them to determine if that eelgrass bed is recovering now that the green crab population has been reduced. We definitely see it appears to be significant differences, but it's a little bit hard to determine that based on drone imagery alone. So we have begun increasing our monitoring, and we're doing some on the ground truthing and going out and taking measurements and a few more metrics so that we have a better understanding of if that bed actually is growing and if there's an effect. So just some lessons learned that we have from our program so far. Green crab definitely like the shallow areas. So they are, 10 feet or less of water. They're really high up on shore. They tend to avoid the deeper areas where you have the larger competitive crabs, such as the large red rocks and Dungeness. They have a better time competing with gracefuls and other similar sized crabs. And we did try a few different baits. We found that herring is definitely the most successful so far. We might do some more trials with that, but it is very successful. And then as you can see in this photo, we have these large commercial style traps that we use from a boat. They're really sturdy and easy to use on the boat. You just toss them over the edge and pull them up the next day with a puller, which is great. And then we also have our really small minnow traps, which don't catch as many green crab and are quite a bit smaller and lighter, but they catch the green crab that the prawn traps miss. So our commercial prawn traps largely get the large adults, medium-sized adults, whereas the minnow traps focus on those smaller, younger juveniles that might otherwise avoid the traps. So it's just helped to supplement our program. We were definitely missing those small crabs in the early days, so we wanted to make sure that we were catching them as well. So for our program, as I mentioned, we made a few changes. We've been increasing the number of traps and the frequency that we go out just to, hopefully start putting more pressure on that population and making a bigger difference. And then we're also increasing the monitoring efforts. So we're going to start doing some clam surveys and native crab surveys, and then the more in-depth eelgrass monitoring as well. So hopefully that will be helpful going forward in our monitoring. And then our other goal, of course, is always just raising awareness, trying to get as many people out there involved or aware of green crab as possible. So we have lots of interest and lots of pressure to remove this very detrimental invasive species. So just a quick summary on ways to get involved. If you notice a European green crab, they are most notable by the 5 spines that they have. So outside of this eye, there are 5 teeth. They're the only species that you will find here with 5. All of our other crabs have 3 spines, 10 spines, although like the colors and shape can be similar, and they can often be misidentified as some of the other crabs. That 5 spines is going to be your best bet. So if you do find a green crab, we definitely appreciate if you're able to report the sightings. We don't ask that you remove the green crab, but if you can take a photo of it, record the GPS location, and then send it in, and that way no one is accidentally euthanizing a native species if it's not a green crab. And then if you do find one, it gives us an opportunity to potentially go out and do some heavy duty trapping to get rid of them if they're new to an area. And then there is a link here for a couple of resources. We use iNaturalist as a really helpful tool if you're trying to identify a crab. So if you think that it's a green crab and you have the iNaturalist app on your phone, you can upload a photo and it'll tell you what it thinks the crab is. And then when you post it, people can comment on it and say, yes, it is indeed a green crab, or no, it's not, it's some other species. And then we also have this link for the BC invasive species, which has some learning resources, quizzes, ways to get involved, that sort of thing. Sorry, I lost my screen somehow. Oh boy. Oh, okay, found it. Sorry. Lastly, just some acknowledgements. We have a lot of different groups that we do communication with, and some research studies with different universities, and just trying to branch out and make as many connections as possible. So some of the groups we've connected with here. Yeah, and that's it for my presentation. Does anyone have some questions?
That's amazing, Tirana. I'm really grateful to you for coming and doing this talk with us and really sharing all the amazing work that you're doing. This is a very serious issue, green crabs, and I think getting the word out is really important. Fascinating that I had no idea they were so destructive to eelgrass, and the correlation between healthy ecosystems and invasives. It's really clear correlation. I just the extent to which they live in the shallows and impact the habitat is really new information to me. I'm just gonna sort of give the folks in the group a little bit of sort of how to participate in the Q&A part. So we can either use the raise hand function in Zoom, and I can call on folks to ask their question directly. Or if you've got questions you want to post them in the chat, we can look in there. I know I have about 10 questions sort of already lined up, so maybe I'll get it started, and then we'll see, how the hands are raised and what comes into the chat. So maybe you did touch on this, but I feel like I might not have totally heard it in the beginning. How did the green crab get introduced?
Sorry, as I was going through my presentation, I felt like I missed a slide or two, and I very well may have. Sorry. So European green crab were suspected to be first on the island in 1999, I believe it was. Originally in the 80s, they were brought to California. So there's been a few different potential sources. There was an aquaculture site down in California, so they were raising them for food, and the larvae just get carried away by the current. So that was definitely a source of spread. And then the larvae can also get carried in the boats, the ballast of boats. So they, yeah,
Yeah.
travel in a few different ways.
Okay. Hey, I'm actually going to ask you, Tyranna, if maybe you want to unshare your screen.
Yep.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so we've got a big list. Like I say, anybody who's got a question, please do use the raise hand function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And I'm just going to keep sort of going down our list of questions that I see here. So how big are the green crabs, and can they be considered for any commercial purposes? So you just touched on that, but what do we think here in BC? Is there an opportunity to like take what we're removing and use them?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. So European green crab can get to be about 4 inches maximum. So they are edible, but they're a little bit small for a food source. There's tons of cookbooks out there. Some people make liquor out of them. There's definitely food sources, and they are used that way where they are native. But again, it's just a little bit more work for a smaller crab. Besides the use for food, they can go into compost, fertilizer. We have a few research groups that are studying potential products that they can be used for. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to talk about them, so I'll just leave them off. But there definitely are a few products that you can potentially make from them, or that are being made from other crabs. I think the biggest thing is that we don't want to create a market that encourages people to want to have them here, but at the same time, they're useful for a lot of products. So it'd be great if for a short period of time they could be used for something. So we are looking into a few options.
Sort of like uni.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does your data live?
Yeah, so all of our data is the sovereign, we have sovereignty with all of our First Nations. So the data belongs to the nations. And if anyone wants to see it, it has to be a request that goes through them specifically. So it is, just private channels for the most part. Yeah, so it's case by case basis.
I'm the one who typed that question in there because I'm really curious about that. SCCA is doing collaborating with Diane Sanford to do eelgrass mapping, and so there's this obvious link between the health of the eelgrass ecosystem and the crabs, and just looking at your numbers in those slides, it was like, wow, okay. So just the numbers of crabs and the relationship to the eelgrass seems like a really important piece of this conversation. So
Mhm.
we
Hey,
just,
Suzanne. Sorry, we've got a question in the chat.
oh, we do. Okay, great. Thanks. So how are the green crabs kept in check in their native habitat?
So basically, green crab just have a lot more native predators in their native habitat. So while they are present, they just don't explode in the same quantities that do here. We do have some native species that have begun to eat them. So we've seen otters and different birds that eat green crab. But I think our population is just a little bit slower to figure out that they're a food source. So yeah, don't have as much, not enough control to keep them in check.
Yet, hopefully. Okay, so maybe could you touch a little bit more on the good news story that's happened on Salt Spring Island, or around Salt Spring? I think you talked about keeping them in check.
Yeah, definitely. So it was an early detection program, I believe. Yeah, so there was an initial detection a few years ago. It wasn't super long ago. And then DFO and possibly some other groups came in and did some intensive trapping. So they were just putting out as many traps as they could for a little while, and then haven't found them since. So yeah, we think that just if you're able to get those traps out there as soon as possible, then they might not become established. Um, that being said, it kind of depends if you're somewhere that's really open where the larvae can potentially get pushed in again at a later date, but that's why you keep monitoring and waiting.
Keep going. So what happens to the bycatch?
All of our bycatch is counted. Some of it gets measured, and then we release it back to where it came from. So we definitely have a leave no trace, kind of try not to harm anything, send it back right away.
Beautiful. Except for the green crabs, what happens to them?
Yes, so the green crab we pull out and freeze, which is considered to be the most humane way to euthanize them. And then the green crab are transported to a compost facility. So they're, used that way.
Compost, right? It's got lots of nutrients for the compost in there. Okay, let's see. Folks, you're more than welcome to put your hands up and post your comments or your questions in the chat. We're getting to the end of some of our questions. So do you have any idea why there are more males in Souque and females in Clayoquot Sound?
It is interesting, and I don't have a for sure answer for that. Sometimes we think it is based on like how long the invasion has been there. You might have slightly different sex ratios for a while.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's fascinating that Souque is sort of an enclosed system just because of the way the water moves. And so you've got to, why, I wonder, the dude's like hanging out there more. So,
definitely.
okay, another question is, who will be taking over this project once the Coastal Restoration Society is completed its work?
Great question. So right now we, of course, hope to be able to continue, and we're hoping that some funding becomes available so that we can keep doing this work. If it doesn't, then I know a lot of the groups that we have trained might continue their own projects. They just won't have funding, so they'll have to find funding internally in order to keep going out. There are a few groups that we work with that are like charitable community groups, so they might have their own funding as well. But we're, certainly hoping that the government decides that this is something worth pursuing, and we can, keep doing it.
Yeah, so you partner with quite a few groups.
Yeah, definitely. We're trying to get lots of people involved, so that's the goal.
That's good. And so that's sort of the segue into the question about, we know there are European green crabs in Howe Sound. And but I'm not totally sure like what, where they are, if there are pockets that are bad on the Sunshine Coast or in the, so our area of interest that the SCCA works in is from Howe Sound to Hamasco. So it's kind of a lot of shoreline and inlets. And so could you give us a sense of where do you know if we're finding green crabs in those regions?
So I have a map that I could pull up that shows green crab detections if that's of interest. I probably should have had that in my presentation, sorry. Just give me 2 seconds.
This is leading to Barbara's got a question in the chat. Can you tell us more about the community groups who are helping with early monitoring projects, how those are formed, and what kind of outreach have you found is effective for getting them going? And maybe we can look at the map, and if there are groups in those regions, we can direct people to connect with those groups. And if there aren't, maybe that's something we want to take away.
Yeah, definitely. We mostly work with First Nations, but we do have we have 3 community groups on the island, and there's one in Pender Harbor. So definitely the potential, if anyone lives near there. So I'm just gonna share my screen real quick.
That's right. You guys are working with pods, right?
Yes, yeah. So Pods is our one on Sunshine Coast, and then we work with Peninsula Stream Society, which is on southern Vancouver Island, and then we have 2 volunteer groups that aren't with an organization; they're just volunteers on the Central Island.
Very cool. So you're basically working with everybody who wants to work with you. Okay.
Yes. So right now, these are areas that green crab have been detected. This is maybe not 100% up to date. This might be 2022. There's been 1 or 2 new detections this year from our program. And then there is a bit more further out here. So they have reached all the way up to Alaska. Unfortunately, this year, I think, was the first detection in Alaska. And then for your area, there are some detections down Ladysmith, Chemainus area, and then definitely around Vancouver and Washington, there are quite a few detections as well. For Madera Park, there have been detections in past years. I think this year they didn't find any, so curious to see, yeah, what's happening there. But yeah, those are the nearest to you.
Yeah, thank you for that. So just following up on, it's fascinating to see where the gaps are too. Like it's not necessarily that there aren't crabs there. It's just that we haven't necessarily been looking.
Yeah, for sure. So the main focus of our early detection program is on the Salish Sea because there are lots of areas where there's no monitoring going on. So we just don't know if they're not there or if it's because no one's looking. So we definitely been trying to fill that gap. Pretty much the entirety of the west coast of Vancouver Island is considered, very high risk and potentially probably has green crab, whereas the Salish Sea, yeah, there seems to be a little bit less current to push them inward than there is outward and up the west coast. We've had a few presentations that we've been involved in that there's some I can't remember what they're called, but different like oceanic models basically showing like what the predicted path of larvae is. So it seems like it's mostly getting pushed out, but a little bit in here.
I do know of, there's, I just know a guy who lives near Hutchinson Creek in Howe Sound and West Howe Sound at Catsum. And I know that the Biosphere Initiative Society is working on looking at the green crabs that are there. So yeah, that was sort of further to how do you develop relationships with folks who, want to get involved, start looking for them.
So for the most part, I would say we get the odd email, but a lot of the time we are just reaching out to groups that are in the right area or that someone with CRS has a connection with. So a lot of word of mouth, if you just reach out, we're we're always happy to meet new people. And even if we can't provide the funding, we're happy to do training and presentations and the such. So however we can help.
Yeah, that's really great. One last question in the chat before, so is climate change having any impact on the green crab population?
We think so. Just as ocean temperatures change a little bit, green crab can spread a little bit further, like, finding them up in Alaska is alarming. We do find though that green crab are really adaptable. So like they can live in different salinities, different temperatures. Like a lot of the time, not a lot of the time, some of the time when we're out trapping in the winter, there's ice over the basins and we're breaking through the ice to drop our traps and the crabs are still running around down there. So like it's pretty cold and they're still fairly active. So yeah, they can take a few days to die in a freezer. They can survive outside of water for several days. They can survive in fresh water for several days. So they're, yeah, very adaptable.
Wow, they're tough.
Yes.
I mean, and compared with other crabs, is this no, like, are they really a lot more tough than other species?
I don't know for all of them, but some of them definitely. Yeah.
Wow, jeez, there's so much to know. Okay, I'm gonna sort of do a last poll of the group. Does anybody have any questions? Hands up, comments in the chat. There we go. Yes. Sorry, I don't see your hand up. Richard? Richard, did you want to ask a question? See if you commented in the chat. No. Oh, there it is. Okay. Is there a way to reduce the green crabs through genetic modification?
I would be really interested in the answer to that as well. I personally don't know of any, but I'm far from the world's expert. So unfortunately, I can't answer that. Apologies.
Yeah, I wonder, are you aware of any research going on in that direction?
I haven't heard of a lot of that. Yeah, I think most of the stuff I hear about is just different trapping methods and yeah, different impacts for the most part.
Try and get them out of the environment.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a huge issue and a huge amount of work. And it's just, hands up to you and your group and all the folks that you're working with. And it's really inspiring to know that, you're collaborating so closely with Indigenous nations to do this work, Tyranna. This is super important. And so I just want to say, let everybody know, that I think Sophie's going to put your contact. Is it okay if we put your contact information into the chat? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And so if anyone's interested, maybe get in touch with Tyranna if you want to, learn more or, find a way to slot into helping with this work. A key aspect of our NEMO Talk series is to connect people with projects to help advance conservation and take action from these talks. So yeah, so Sophie's going to post contact information for DFO to report sightings and some resources on invasives and the iNaturalist. Have you got like an iNaturalist program or a project that we want to lead people to?
We don't have one.
Yeah.
There might be one out there, but we don't have one.
Okay, that's great. Maybe somebody will start one. There we go. Okay. Contact info, it's all in the chat. So yeah, once again, Tyranna, thank you so much for joining this talk and sharing about your work.